Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar presented by AGMU University. As you know, every month we have a very special meeting and encounter with professional international speakers, but especially very important people that represent this beautiful school, AGMU University. As you know, the school has different campuses in not just Florida, but in the US and especially in Puerto Rico. And they also provide different online programs. So if you want to learn more about the school, please visit the website. We're going to share it on the screen. And before we start and I introduce my special guest today, I want to talk about the school. So remember, visit the website, UAGM.edu, and you're going to find all the different programs for bachelor's, master's, doctorate, any type of program that you're looking, you're going to be able to find it. And the beauty about education today is that you don't need to, because if you work full time and you don't have enough time to go and attend school, you can actually take online classes. So there is no excuse for you not to further your education. You can do it. Once you start, time flies, you're going to do it very fast. So if you're watching this seminar today, take the step and visit the website. I also want to introduce our special guest today. I have two important faculty members of Ana Jimenez, and I'm going to tell you more about it. Let me start with my first guest. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go here. Sorry. Okay. So let me talk about Professor FRANSHESKA CARDONA. She is a bilingual licensed clinical social worker in the states of Florida and Kansas. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Criminal Justice and Master's degree in Clinical Social Work. She's also a certified domestic violence advocate and DBA trainer from the state of Florida. Originally from Carolina, Puerto Rico, Carolina, right? Puerto Rico, Mrs. Cardona has been in the social work field for 5 years. She has worked in child welfare, community mental health, and with victims of crimes. Professor Cardona currently owns a private practice office providing mental health services and is a part-time faculty member for Ana Jimenez University. Welcome, Professor Cardona. How are you today?
Thank you, Maria. I am doing great. I am super excited to be here with just two amazing colleagues.
Thank you so much. And my second guest is Professor Jacqueline Padilla. Professor Padilla holds a bachelor's degree in social work and a master's degree in administrative social work. With a certification in clinical social work, Professor Padilla has over 20 years of experience, including direct service, grant writing, training development, and project management. Ms. Jacqueline currently is the shelter director for the Domestic Violence Center in Osceola County, Florida, and well as the Social Work Bachelor's Coordinator for Ana Jimenez University. Professor Padilla is currently completing a PhD in Crisis Management at Walden University. So welcome, Professor Padilla.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be here.
Well, when I read your bios, I'm very impressed with, of course, all the experience you have in social work, but of course, other fields as well. And that's the reason why we have a special presentation today that is going to be related with this industry. The name of the presentation is Recharge and Renew Building Resilience Against Burnout. So what is this topic about?
Jackie, you want to go ahead?
Yes. This is a great opportunity to talk about the importance of self-care, the importance of working with resiliency, in order to prevent everything related to burnout, passion fatigue, vicarious trauma that could be a result of our busy schedule and how much we're exposed to the situations that other people face. So it's a great opportunity to share what are the strategies that we can implement that we can use to prevent these type of outcomes.
And when we talk about this type of topics, we don't really think that can affect anybody. And every day, any industry, it doesn't matter where you work, you can actually go through a lot of stress and your body gets tired. I've been actually going through a lot this year and my body changed a lot. It's like, what happened with me? I'm tired all the time. So I need to push myself hard and, try to do a special diet or more exercises to have the energy back. But it's definitely what you're saying, all the psychological or personal issues that you have, or maybe at work, and everything can really affect your body. And the exhaustion that you go is, well, eventually it's gonna get to a point that you're gonna burn out, like you said. So I'm not gonna talk more about this because you are the experts, and it's gonna give us, like you said, Professor Padilla, more ideas, tips, but especially strategies on how we can manage all these challenges, but especially learn more about this. So I'm gonna give you the screen. It's all yours, so you can go ahead and start with this beautiful presentation.
Let me know when you guys are able to see the screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and get started. So these are the objectives, which we kind of already heard Jackie talk a little bit about. We're going to just discuss the difference between stress, compassion fatigue, and burnout, because they are very different and they manifest themselves very differently as well. We're going to review just mitigating factors related to job stress and burnout specifically, learn about self-care in the workplace, right? Inside the workplace and outside, but we did want to tackle it a little bit more to the workplace, as well as just how resiliency and cultivating resiliency is one of the strategies and tools that we can use to mitigate burnout as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started with what is stress, right? I think we use the word stress a lot. I think Maria mentioned I've had a lot of stress throughout this whole year. So stress obviously is a normal reaction to everyday pressures, but can become unhealthy when it upsets our day-to-day functioning, right? So there's something called healthy stress, and then there's something called unhealthy stress as well. It involves changes affecting nearly every system in your body, influencing how we feel, how we behave, and more so, especially in the workplace, how we function on our day-to-day activities as well. Jackie, anything you want to add?
No, you have said it all. As it can affect our bodies, it can affect our health, it can affect our personal life, but it can also go to our work setting, as you mentioned. And that's kind of like the importance of talking about it and being open to receive new strategies.
Mm-hmm. So, Jackie, you want to take this one? I know you love this part.
Absolutely. So one of the things, as you mentioned, is it can have an impact, right? And we're going to be talking a little bit about how does it impact our mental health, how does it impact on our physical health. And one of the things that we can start experiencing is what we call psychosomatic complaints, right? And these could be seen or observed through different symptoms. And you can see in the screen, we have musculoskeletal pain, gastrointestinal problems, which is something that people usually are concerned about or complain about having that discomfort, lead to physical, psychological, and social impairment, organizational issues when it comes to working and doing our usual task. And of course, that can have an impact in how much we produce in the work area. And then, of course, productivity. So that's part of it. And again, that's why it's important that we have these open conversations and how we can all be part of that, preventing that issue.
Absolutely. I think one of also the biggest things is just a decline in a little bit of cognitive function, whether that is a lack of focus or when we start feeling that we're procrastinating, and a lack of concentration as well. And that goes hand in hand with organizational issues and the productivity levels of a lot of the team members.
So as you mentioned, and we have been kind of like talking about, these are processes that doesn't happen from one day to the other, right? We can see that significant impact in the work area, but it can also take us away from that first time that we decided to work in a specific field, right? We all start working in a specific field or just go into a very professional area because we are motivated. We want to be part of change. We want to contribute to others. And those kind of feelings and perspectives start changing with time, to the point that we can have like that dissatisfaction, start feeling and experiencing that burnout that maybe we cannot identify it on time. So again, not only we can go through that situation, but we have to be very mindful of how I'm feeling and be able to recognize that my symptoms, my behaviors, the way that I'm feeling could be very different to what other people can experience.
Mm-hmm. And I think another big part of it, like Jackie was saying, is that every experience is going to be different regardless if we all work on the same team, even maybe in the same cubicle area. There's also going to be personal factors that are going to play a big part in how we handle stress, as well as just societal factors, whether that is anything going around where you live or on a more macro scale, as well as just economic and financial issues, which tend to be one of the biggest stressors, at least from what I hear, not only from clients, but just colleagues, students as well, and just overall.
So as we were mentioning, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
We can have different responses, and there's different ways that we can identify. And as Francesca was mentioning, and myself, there could be a lot of different responses. And again, like not everyone is going to present those responses in the same way. And of course, we can have some reactions to the situations that we're facing. And Francesca has been working with trauma for a long time, just very familiar with the different responses that we can have from a psychological point of view. So Francesca, if you want to talk a little bit about that fight, flight, and freeze response, and how that can be identified in the work area, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So fight, flight, and freeze is one of the most common trauma responses, but it can also happen during high levels of stress or anxiety. And fight doesn't necessarily have to be physical. It can be that employee that suddenly doesn't want to follow directions, or you might feel becomes combative. They're not getting along with their peers like they used to, right? They might even feel a little bit isolated. The flight is, kind of the opposite. They're not going to want to engage. They're going to want to go home early. There might be tardiness. There might be absences in the workplace as well, because they just feel like they can't be there, right? That's the thought process. I cannot be here. And freeze is when you might see an employee that gets stuck. And this might be so more reflected in that productivity. Hey, you used to be able to complete 3-4 tasks a week. Now you're getting stuck at 2. Oh, I just feel frozen and I feel stuck, right? One of the biggest things that gets impacted is what we call the executive functioning, which is time management, communication with others, things that we need in our day life to kind of mold our day a little bit better and to function a little bit smoother. And those start to get impacted, right? And obviously, if we're having physiological responses or psychosomatic responses, such as, for example, eczema, if you're under high stress, you will have a flare up. A lot of people, and there's a lot of studies that link digestive issues like IBS to high levels of stress and anxiety. So if I'm dealing with things on a physiological level, on a cognitive, mental, and emotional level, I might feel like I'm declining as well. So everything kind of interconnects, right? I feel like it's like a little web. As soon as one part of the web starts going down, the other parts start to try and overcompensate, and then we start trying to balance everything out.
And something that I want to add to what you just mentioned, Francesca, is the fact that we can start kind of like jumping into this freeze mode, which usually happens when we disconnect. Right? We start disconnecting from what we're looking at, what we're practicing, what we're hearing when it comes to instruction or new initiative. And that type of disconnection, of course, is going to bring a lot of difficulties concentrating, following through, and completing tasks, right? And a lot of people justify this as a lack of attention, right? but it goes beyond that. And then again, that's why that self-awareness and self-regulation, which we're going to be talking about, it's so important.
Absolutely. These are just some of the other kind of experiences that someone who's going through very high levels of stress might sometimes be able to identify, but a lot of the times they can't, right? Because you start kind of kicking into survival mode. Oh, I know I'm not feeling well, but I still need to work because I have all these other responsibilities. I think for me, one of the ones that stands out the most is that cognitive avoidance, because a lot of individuals start experiencing not a cognitive decline, but they'll say to me, hey, I feel like my brain's not working properly. Or I used to be able to pay attention to stuff. I can't focus. I can't keep on task. I also just feel just very blah, right? And that's the word that they see. But what they're really trying to express is that there's no motivation whatsoever to complete their task. And it's very hard for them to focus on it. Jackie, do any of these stand out to you, or anything that you notice more?
So that feeling of overwhelmness, and we have worked together a lot with that sense of not feeling empowered, not feeling like you have control of your life, feeling like helpless. And that's a very negative feeling. It's a very it's a situation that affects a lot of how you feel with yourself, and the hopefulness that you see, not only when it comes to growing in a professional stance, but also being able to connect with yourself. And as we're going to be talking about, that self-awareness is very important in order for us to take some actions. So in social work, in any behavioral field, there's the empowerment perspective that we work with a lot, right? That sense of I have control, I feel good with myself, I have the ability of making this type of decision. So everything that we have mentioned goes against that. And we start feeling that lack of freedom to make decisions, to know what it's bothering me, to set boundaries and see a little bit of what type of actions should I be making. And then, of course, taking accountability for what is mine and what is the responsibility of that workplace or other people around me. So it goes along with one another, just like Francesca was mentioning. And that type of feeling makes us feel vulnerable. It makes us feel like we're shutting down. We are not accomplishing some other stuff that maybe we envision at some point in our lives. So that's when we start seeing that motivation go downward, and we face all of these different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that ties into the second one, that sense of incompetence, because, right, as soon as we feel like we're not performing up to par, we start feeling like, oh, what if I'm not good at this job anymore? Maybe I'm in the wrong role, especially if someone has gotten a promotion or moved to a different team. And there's obviously new stressors with that new role, or just adapting to that new team. That can also bring a sense of incompetence, depending on the task.
And one thing that I want to add to this, and again, we have seen that and we have worked with that when it comes to a trauma-informed approach, when it comes to that burnout that we receive out of what we do, is actually feeling like maybe I cannot produce as much as other people in the work area. And then we start isolating, which is kind of like that freeze kind of mode and flight mode, where maybe we don't participate and we don't feel that motivation to be part of new initiatives, to go to a training and just be around other people, because we don't feel the motivation. We feel afraid of not being competent enough, and we just shy, we hide away.
So this is burnout. Jackie, you want to tackle burnout?
Absolutely. So when we talk about burnout, this is a word that we pronounce a lot, right? We talk a lot about burnout, and it's a good thing when we recognize that we're not feeling ourselves, but it's important also to understand what it means, what it looks like. And one of the things that we should be looking for is that it has a prolonged response, right? We being under a lot of stress, chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors, we all go through that, but we start presenting those effects that we mentioned before in a long term or medium term, right? And working and doing what we do, as we mentioned at some point, we engage in a field, we go into this profession, whichever that looks like, feeling that motivation to be part of that change, connecting to others, but we start feeling or experiencing the opposite. For those that work with clientele, maybe we're a little bit reluctant to connect with them, right? To be empathetic with what they're going through. And at some point, we can also engage in just avoiding them. And sometimes we can see people like getting upset, like somebody came for services. I'm upset about it because I just don't want to engage in that. Another thing that we can actually see is that sense of anxiety and overly concerned about what is going on around me, and maybe the outcome of what we're doing, and not feeling that satisfaction, feeling inspired as we used to at the very beginning of our professional career. And then, of course, at some point, I kind of like mentioned of the importance of everyone being part of that change. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about that. But we as individuals, as staff members, have a responsibility. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But then from a work stance perspective, institutions, agencies, organizations, they can be part of that change. And some of the factors that can actually increase that burnout is actually having a lot of paperwork to work with, a very high caseload, not having the appropriate atmosphere or environment at the workplace, not being financially in a good place, and we feel like we're doing too much for little, not having a caseload or a workload that it's equal for everyone. And then, of course, little opportunities to continue growing. And all of those are some of the factors that can contribute and actually not prevent from connecting to the staff member and actually putting in place policies and procedures that can prevent burnout.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And for those that don't necessarily have direct client contact as part of their roles, it can manifest itself as, other than the avoidance, a lack of creativity, a lack of keeping on task, and just overall avoidance of the workload. It might be that coworker that you pass by and you're like, why are you watching YouTube? We have this big project due on Friday and you're watching videos, and that can just be a sign of burnout and not necessarily a person being quote unquote lazy, right? Which I think can happen, especially if I'm carrying a load and I see Jackie looking at cats on her computer screen, right?
And actually that heaviness of waking up in the morning and just saying, I'm going to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sense of, I don't want to go there. Like, it's heavy to wake up in the morning. It's heavy to go to bed because it's kind of like you're getting close to going to work. So some of the causes that we mentioned, that sense of not having control over what we're dealing with, what we do, and how we're feeling, lack of clarity regarding expectations, not only from others, but from ourselves, conflict with other people. Again, we avoid, we try not to engage. Maybe we'll start having kind of like that difficulty. And Francesca was mentioning in that flight response of connecting with other people, working in committees and other type of group type of activities. And then, of course, maybe we can start procrastinating because we have a difficulty concentrating. And then we jump in and fall into a lot of things to do or nothing at all. right? And then, of course, the lack of support, it's a big factor, which, again, we have to consider, and work-life balance, because it goes from the work area to our personal lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had clients, right, express to me, oh, it's Sunday at 5 p.m. and I start crying because I know I have to wake up early to go to work. And it's not about the routine changing. It's about me going into work, that whether that's the office or whether that's working from home, right? Because I do have a lot of clients that work remotely and still experience that stress or high stress levels and anxiety. I think out of all of these, one of the ones that stands out the most to me is the too much or too little to do. Because one would think, oh, what do you mean too little to do would cause job burnout? Well, I will probably constantly be overthinking, am I doing this correctly? Am I doing this too quick? Am I doing this wrong? What is expected of me? What do I do with this free time as well in order to feel productive, right? So that too little of workload can sometimes cause job burnout because a lot of individuals will start overthinking if they're doing things correctly and where can they use their time.
And one of the things when we think about the physical response, that physical impact, how many times we hear about people going through migraines, right? That you can be a person that regularly goes through that, but feeling like this, it can increase the severity or the frequency where you experience those type of things. And in the same way, other issues like chest pain or that sense that I can't breathe, which it's maybe a complication from that anxiety and overly concern about not having or feeling that we don't have the capacity to do stuff, and then just having a lot of things to do and a little bit of motivation to connect.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about this, which is, again, just the physiological responses, and we highlight them. And one of the things that I like saying to people or clients is, hey, this is your body signaling that they've tried, maybe mentally and emotionally, giving you the cues that we're ready to kind of start shutting down because the stress levels are getting a little bit too much for us to handle. And since you're not kind of taking the steps necessary, I'm going to signal it in a different way, in a more physiological way, because normally that will get your attention, right? Like Jackie mentioned, the headaches, the nausea, changes in sleep patterns and appetites are extremely common, as well as one of the symptoms for major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder as well. So those two are interlinked, right? Whether that is, oh, I used to eat breakfast and now I'm not waking up hungry in the morning, or hey, I'm sleeping at the normal time that I sleep, but I'm waking up constantly in the middle of the night. So those two things, sleep disturbance and appetite disturbance, can look very different as well. And obviously, if it's in a long term, it can result in just more autoimmune, right, health conditions. I know there's been a couple of studies, right, interlinking autoimmune disease with high levels of stress that are very prolonged, right, throughout the years. We even have, due to high levels of anxiety and stress, people that suffer, aneurysms, strokes, even seizures, right? We even have psychosomatic seizures. So those are very scary, but also things that could happen if we don't take care of ourselves.
And you know what? Going through these physical effects of, we have worked with clients that go to the doctor. They have a concern, they're not feeling well, maybe they're extremely tired, they're having all of these different things, and maybe the doctor cannot find anything. They cannot point out what we're talking about. But just the fact that at some instances, we can have a doctor saying, do you have a lot of stress? Like I myself sometimes get upset because I've been asked that question, right? Like, I don't want to feel like my symptoms are being minimized, but it's still a health condition, right? And just acknowledging that this might be the consequence of high levels of stress or just being extremely exhausted because of the burnout and everything that goes with it, it's a very important first step to actually look for the appropriate attention or specialized support that we might need.
So again, just more physical responses. Some of the ones not mentioned earlier might be just the heart rate, the dizziness, right, or what some people call vertigo, difficulty breathing, and obviously diminished immune health, which I always find very interesting. My partner earlier was like, I've been getting sick a lot. And I'm like, I know it's the change in weather, but also you've been really stressed and your body just can't keep up with everything, right? So these are some more of the physical responses. Jackie, do you have other physical responses you want to add? I think we've covered most of them.
We covered them, and you mentioned at some point having a hard time sleeping or actually waking up very, very tired. Like, I went to bed very early at night, but then woke up very, very tired. A lot of people experience a lot of nightmares and maybe dreams after dreams after dreams, right? So all of those are different ways that we can start kind of like identifying these type of things. And then again, maybe I am very tired in the morning and we can have somebody else that is not sleeping at all and the person doesn't feel like that, right? Or overthinking about what we're working with, right? We can stop that. And of course, with that comes a lot of other physical symptoms, just like we mentioned. So it's important to just identify them. And I even go further and recommend that we write them down. And if we can keep a log of all of those different things, we can actually see how often it is and how do we should present that to medical staff.
Absolutely. When it comes to mental health, obviously there's going to be an array of symptoms that are tied into high levels of stress, whether that's hopelessness, guilt, numbing. Numbing, I feel, is very common, and a lot of people just correlate it to just being task focused. And so I have to shut off my emotions, right? So it becomes a little bit normalized. Disconnecting from others at work, PTSD, there is traumatic instances related to the workplace that could play a part as well. Depression and anxiety, dissociating. We talked about the self-confidence, just minimizing. There can be suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts, right? Depending on the levels of stress and depending on the work field that you're in. I remember having a client in a tech industry, a very niche tech industry, and they were experiencing a lot of layoffs in that very niche area. And they were like, this is absolutely terrifying to me. I do not know what I would do, right, if this were to happen to me. And that was causing a lot of stress. And then they were like, well, it's causing me stress and I feel like I'm not working my best, but I feel like I can't work my best because I'm extremely scared about this other situation. Right. And obviously being more vulnerable to trauma in the future or just mental health overall, because it's a risk factor, right? It can make us more susceptible to other symptoms and other diagnoses or an array of issues.
One of the things that I wanted to kind of like mention as well is that feelings that I can never do enough. Like, I don't feel like there's nothing I can do. Things are not going to get better, or I'm not going to have a better performance. The other thing that I want to kind of like ask you about, Francesca, is how do we disconnect to that point where we don't only avoid people, but also start presenting those isolation behaviors at home from family members. And I mean, I think we can all say that we have personal issues or problems or circumstances that we deal in a personal level, professional level. And what can you say when we cannot distinguish one from the other, or one hides with the other? Like, what can you mention about that from a mental health perspective?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because a lot of the times we feel they go hand in hand, right? A lot of us work 40 plus hours a week. So when we go home, we've really not have, most of us haven't been taught how to disconnect or leave work at work, right? And I think this is something that we hear over and over again. Hey, you have to learn how to leave work at work, but how do I actually do that? Especially if I'm working from home as well, or I work remote, like how do I balance that? So one of the things that I like explaining to clients is, hey, let's like visualize it if that works for you. Or what are some things, right, that you feel are important to you to keep separate? There's always some level of trickling in, whether that's from the personal life to the work life, or the work life to the personal life, right? I'm a firm and a big believer in seeking support with your peers, especially depending on the field that you're in. So for us, we're social workers, and I know if I had a really rough day, I can call one of my colleagues and like, hey, I want to talk to you about this before I get home, right? Or vice versa. Even in tech fields, finance, like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. How can I decompress it? And obviously, like I mentioned, I think it's unrealistic to believe it's not going to trickle in any way, shape, or form. There's always going to be some level of, I took a little bit of work home, but maybe I didn't take the whole thing home. But also leaving space to acknowledge it, because if I don't leave any space to actually confront, like, hey, I took this home. Why did I take it home? What was it about this one thing that I felt I couldn't let go? Or if it's my personal life, why is this personal issue so big that it's still coming to work with me? So acknowledging it and giving the space to process it is really important.
I think a very important component that that goes along with it is our different perspective. Like from a cultural perspective, we can now have a very different point of view or opinion about stuff. And then when we think about, especially in the social area, this commitment or this sense of, I need to be there. I have to be there for my coworkers. I have to be there for the clients. I have to be there for the organization. And I think it's a beautiful thing. But when it goes overboard, there's a bigger chance that we end up feeling like this and experiencing all of these different symptoms.
I think one of the biggest things, and this is probably on a bigger scale, so we can do a whole different training on this, but in my experience, a lot of individuals who identify the biggest part of themselves with work have a harder time disconnecting, or they feel that their worth comes from professional achievements solely, obviously are going to have a bigger time disconnecting, because if I let this go, who am I, right? And what else is going to make me happy, which is where the resiliency and the self-care comes in. Again, just...
Yes. And one of the things, Francesca, I'm so sorry that I cut you off.
No, you're good.
We have talked about this before, like engaging in other activities. And one of the things that we have found, and when I talk about I'm talking about the so many things that Francesca and I do in a professional level, but we find a lot of people disconnecting from who they are, right? Disconnecting from those usual activities that we practice, that we should be very connected to. And I was sharing with Francesca the other day, I've been trying to reconnect with myself with reading, just reading fiction, right? I used to do that a lot, but now I have a lot of things to do. I don't have the time, and we start disconnecting from that. So just engaging in trying to reconnect with what I like, what I enjoy, and just setting a schedule or an opportunity for me to practice that, it's very important. And then, of course, we can start losing that interest in those type of activities because we're extremely tired. And that's part of the picture, right? So again, I think it goes, and And it's important that we recognize that this is very person-to-person, individual kind of thing. We have reflect with clients and we have talked about how does this look like for you, and how much we relate with what other people are experiencing or not. But we are individuals, and our experiences, our lifestyle, our cultural beliefs, and the circumstances that we're living at work can be very different.
Absolutely. And other than the loss of interest in regular activities or hobbies that you used to have, it can also manifest itself, especially in the personal, more personal life. Oh, I don't want to cook anymore. I might have loved cooking in the past, but I don't want to cook anymore. And then we see the pile of clothes going up and we're like, well, I don't have energy to perform at work 100% and perform at the house 100% either. Right. So that can be two things that correlate as well. And then everything else that we've talked about, especially the difficulty separating work from the personal life, that can look an array. It can look like what I was explaining before, which is the trickling in, or it can look a little bit different, especially with people that maybe work with victims of crime or more trauma related, such as social workers and mental health professionals, which is reliving maybe a client's experiences, but in your own personal life as well. So that is also an example of just a difficulty separating the work life from the personal life. This is your favorite.
So let's talk about a little bit about compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is the term that describes the physical, emotional, and psychological impact of helping others. Right? And again, we connect with people, we care a lot, and we can start experiencing some stress out of that relationship, right? Sometimes we can get that a little bit confused with what burnout is. But in this particular case, we are talking more about having a higher tendency of being emotionally exhausted, right? And having that positive perspective of the chances that clients are going to do better, the chances that clients or whatever I do doesn't rely only in me. And then, of course, not feeling like I actually everything depends on me. So again, we talk about burnout and how it makes us feel, but compassion fatigue is caring a lot, which is nothing wrong with that. We need to care. We are doing what we do because we care about something. But that sense of empathy with others gets to an extreme, to a level where we're not differentiating from how we care about others and how we care about ourselves.
Which, is obviously more prevalent in first responders, mental health, social work, hospitals, but that doesn't mean that other areas of labor do not experience compassion fatigue either. Okay, so we're going into adversity brings in strength. So the joys of practice reaction. So this is one of the things that we can use to mitigate compassion fatigue specifically. So just the satisfaction of helping, because there can be a decline in that, especially with compassion fatigue. Freedom, independence, having our meaningful our life experiences feel meaningful again, emotional growth, obviously personality qualities and intellectual stimulations as well.
And we're going to be talking about setting boundaries, and I think one of the hardest challenges, maybe I'm just putting myself out there, but we have seen it a lot, is setting boundaries with ourselves. It's not only about setting boundaries with what we practice and with others, but it's how do I recognize when it's okay to practice this or do that, and when is the time for me to stop and set that ends, right? in order for me to take care of myself. And then again, this goes along with our cultural, right? Our background, our beliefs, and how we learn in an early stage of our life, and we practice along all the way, that the more I care about the others, the better person that I am, and not question ourselves because we need to put a stop into it. So yeah.
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about self-care, and we've kind of hinted that self-care and resiliency are two of the main tools or strategies used to mitigate burnout, compassion fatigue, and just high levels of stress. So resiliency basically is the person's ability to adapt in a positive way to difficult and trying situations. So resiliency, and I think people get confused because people just kind of sometimes tell me, well, I wasn't born with resiliency. I'm like, no one is really born with resiliency, right? That's something that we cultivate, right? It's like this little plant that we start taking care of, and we have to water it, and we have to put it out in the sun, and we have to take care of it. And sometimes we're going to have situations where our plant isn't looking the brightest or the best, right? But it doesn't mean that it's not there, right? So we're going to have maybe some instances where we don't feel as resilient, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean that it's left, right? So one of the things that we say when we talk about resiliency as a strategy for burnout is because a lot of the time interconnected with burnout, we're going to have traumatic events or just a little bit of more harsher situations or trying situations that we need to overcome. And we might have some tools that are going to help, but at the end of the day, it's not how many tools that I have, it's how I use them and when I use them. And the how and when is the resiliency aspect.
And just experiencing hard times and how hard feelings or that negative sensation out of these circumstances. Having or being resilient doesn't mean that it's not real, right? What we're feeling is real. But being resilient, it's a matter of just identifying everything that I do from my end, that yes, I could have a lot of different challenges in this, but at the same time, how do we recognize everything that we have done to try new strategies, to look for help, to come up with different plans? And so whatever it looks like, right? And that's being resilient. Like I'm looking at myself at that person that is trying other things, that it's trying to make a difference, that it's trying to overcome, or is trying to identify somebody that can jump into this project or whatever challenge we're going through. So being resilient is recognizing all of those different things, and also being able to recognize where does my responsibility starts and when it ends, and what is your role in this process, right? It's
Absolutely.
recognizing all of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to developing resiliency, right, Jackie has talked a lot about boundaries and where does my role start? Where does your role start? Where does it end? Where does yours end? And where does my end? So one of the biggest thing is creating a balance when caring for others. And that can be in all aspects of your life, professional, personal, romantic, even with your friends. I can't tell you the amount of times I've had a client say, I'm burnt out from a friend. I just can't keep giving them advice. And I'm like, well, why are we doing it? Right? Because there has to be a boundary there. Self-nurturing and self-building. So taking care of yourself. Being very aware of our needs, not only physically, but emotionally. What do I need to feel better? What are some things that make me feel better and make me feel whole? And obviously connecting our bodies, right? Our bodies, our mind, and our emotional state are very interconnected. as well as our feelings. And obviously other people will strengthen us as individuals because we are social beings. So that is just inherently a trait that we have, right? And allow us to choose to continue to do the important work. So Jackie has talked a lot about that passion that drives us in whichever field that we're in, and how can we continue to have that forefront. I am a firm believer that if you love what you're doing, you're obviously going to be happier going into work. And the moment where we start doubting if I love what I'm doing anymore is obviously normally the moment where you start feeling like, hey, my supervisor kind of pulled me to the side and said, hey, what's going on? You're a little bit different. You're working a little bit different or performing different as well.
And one of the things that I wanted to mention, and we have worked with clients in that sense as well, is that I feel good with myself when I do something positive with others. And again, it's a very thin line, because if my stability, my emotional well-being depends on how other people are doing, there's a problem there, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with caring about others. We're not inviting anyone to just ignore other people's needs or just don't care. It's the limit or the extreme that we can practice this where there's no balance, right? What we want is for it to have a balance. Helping others is important, but I cannot help others if I'm not doing well, right? And that's why it's so important that we talk about self-care.
And my worth and happiness, especially as a professional, cannot depend if my clients have succeeded or not. Right. I think that's also a very tricky line that sometimes I hear a lot of people struggle with. Well, I put in everything that I had, but the client didn't succeed or the project wasn't a hit. Right. And those two things don't necessarily always are going to be on the same playing field. Right. I could have given it my best and something wasn't successful. It doesn't mean that I did a poor job. Right. More strategies for resiliency is engaging in self-care, obviously. And self-care is one of those things I feel in the last couple of years, especially with social media, has been overcomplicated. And it doesn't need to be as complicated as a lot of us think it needs to be. You don't need to go out and buy the new Bed Bath & Body Works scent. You don't need the bath bombs. You don't need the crystals, the books. You know, all of that can be useful and it can be great. But self-care inherently is what works for you, right? And we're going to dive into like the different areas where we can practice self-care. But one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, how can I engage in self-care if I don't have these other things? Like, well, the one thing doesn't necessarily have to do with another. And obviously empowering our colleagues to practice self-care, whether that is verbally or leading by example. One of my biggest tips, especially when I have clients that have very busy schedules or are in leadership positions or supervised positions where they tell me, well, my calendar is packed, right? So one of the things that I always recommend, and sometimes I even do, is like, okay, well, you're going to take 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the afternoon. You're going to put in your calendar, go for a walk, right? Because for a lot of us, if it's not on our calendar, it's just not going to happen, right? With busy schedules. So self-care isn't just taking the scraps of times left to take care of myself. Self-care is making the time to take care of myself. And those are two very different things.
And one of the things that I wanted to add to that is actually how much we can cope with food, right? There are fields where we started eating a lot of sweets, a lot of things that are not the best. And practicing self-care when it comes to that is actually taking time to do some prep meals. So yes, we have the snacks, which are, of course, very important. But now we're having more control of those spaces. And my well-being or my satisfaction doesn't only depend on what I eat and how I make myself feel better with food.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have healthy coping mechanisms and we have, I don't like calling them unhealthy because maybe they worked at one point, but we do have maladaptive coping mechanisms, right? And I think food is one of the easiest ones that people gravitate towards as well, especially either the sweet or the salty, right? So how can we reduce burnout on a more organizational level? And Jackie has a lot of experience with this.
I love training. You know that. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about stuff, right? It's a great opportunity having a conversation about important topics to start setting the foundation. Like a training is not enough. It's what we do with that information, right? Looking for books to read about it. Maybe, I don't know, doing meetings where we talk about this specific topic or subject, right? It's how do we and how what we do with that information. Supervision is a very important element, and Francesca and I work with a trauma-informed project. It was one of 3 in the whole state of Florida, where we had an opportunity to using those principles of a trauma-informed to create new policies, procedures, and practices that can actually improve the well-being of staff, right? And supervision plays a big role. Why? Because having those check-ins where we talk with staff members, where we touch base of how you're feeling, how productive you feel, or how well and satisfied you feel with yourself, and how do you decompress. It's just having that opportunity to connect with others. And yes, of course, the productivity and everything that goes along with my role in a work field is important. But if we're not okay, and if we are strangers among the field, that's not really gonna help me as a supervisor to identify other areas that maybe need my attention, or maybe require develop new initiatives, and actually taking from those experts in the field what they're going through and what those challenges might look like. How many times we face difficulties with a specific task or a specific role, or maybe some of the responsibilities that I have. Sometimes we have to look at that, review, and come up with other strategies, because social issues change, right? Everything that we work with changes. And the same way, we also have to change our approach and the way we have accomplished that. Another important thing is, as we mentioned before, that psychological wellness. I always think that just spending some time with myself and dedicating that, I don't know, 1 year visit to check with myself, to checking with myself how I'm feeling, and those other activities like meditation, practicing yoga, and all of those different activities are important, so I can see where I am and how I can continue growing in that wellness. Self-care, we have mentioned it before, and we're going to go in depth in that. And then, of course, being mindful, which is a very interesting dynamic skill that requires time for us to develop.
And one of the things with supervision that I wholeheartedly believe, especially from a trauma-informed organizational standpoint, is sometimes massaging the language. So I know in the past, instead of calling it supervision, we would call them check-ins, because, right, the employees inherently felt less threatened, right? It changed a little bit the dynamic, because, oh, it's not a supervision where I'm going to get in trouble or there's going to be a work performance, but it's just a check-in to see how I'm doing and if there's any support that might be needed. So that, I know that was one of the biggest things that we worked on, and it gave great results. So self-regulation skills, these look different for everyone, right? Because some people might need them more than others. But obviously, it just has to do with the process of letting go of the over-responsibility that sometimes we even self-impose on ourselves, right? Nobody maybe had told us that we should be doing X, Y, Z, or taking on different tasks or different roles, but we do. And that obviously can cause a lot of emotional distress, right? For a lot of the times, obviously in the helping professions, this is going to be a little bit higher just due to the nature of the work, but also in any other profession. And I use tech and finance a lot because I do have clients in those areas where right now it's very unstable or a little bit shaky. So how can we start self-regulating and controlling our emotions? And one of the biggest things that I think I tell colleagues, friends, clients, whoever wants to listen to me that day is starting to recognize when I'm heading, instead of recognizing, oh, I'm at a level 8 or 9 and I'm completely out of control. Hey, can we start recognizing when we're at a level maybe 5 or a level 4? Because it's going to be a lot easier for me to self-regulate if I catch it a little bit earlier, right? It's like the hunger cues. If I wait until I'm extremely hungry to the point where my head hurts, it's not going to work out. And normally you're going to eat and you're not even going to like what you eat and your stomach's going to be upset. But if I eat when I start getting a little bit hungry, I'm going to enjoy my food. I'm going to enjoy my meal. It's going to be a little bit more of a pleasurable activity.
And one of the things that we talked about previously is the importance of not disconnecting, right? Which is, it's going to happen out of that burnout. It's going to happen.
Absolutely.
So if we want to practice self-care, we have to work with the other thing, right? And the same way we start identifying those symptoms and just do something about it on time and not waiting in a long term. The same thing happens when something happens that I don't feel comfortable with. Maybe I'm upset about something. I cannot point out what happened. Maybe dedicating a little bit of time identifying what were the challenges for today, what happened, how did I feel with it? There's this situation that I would like for it to change. What about it, right? And when does it start becoming something that hurts me in very different ways or make me upset? So we start pointing out those little pieces that might be attached to the huge issue, right?
Absolutely. You can take this one, Jack.
Yes. So self-care is a very important preventive practice. And you were mentioning about how much we engage with these specific activities that are being sold or sell to us as the only alternative for us to feel better. There are some instances when maybe somebody can tell me, why don't you take this bubble bath and just spend that time with yourself? Well, that not necessarily helps me, right? It can help others, and that's fine. But if it doesn't help me, what other activities I can practice to feel better? I can say I take the time every morning to spend some time with the dogs and just watch the nature. And that half an hour drinking my coffee has become a very important practice for me. It's important that we're not only practicing self-care in my personal life, but also consider how can I practice that at work? How do I practice that on my way home? A lot of us spend a lot of time on traffic, right? And there's nothing we can do about it. But there's other strategies or activities that we can actually put in place while we're traveling from one place to the other. In my case, I practice a lot of audible books. And that has become a very relaxing activity where I just disconnect from everything that happened during the day or everything that I'm encountering when it comes to traffic, and just makes me feel a little bit motivated because what I'm reading, which again, it could be very different for you and for me, but just choosing what I'm gonna listen to, sometimes for people could be music or talking to a loved one, just identify what works for me. It's a very, very important thing to consider. Self-care is a proactive approach that mitigates impairment and enhances job satisfaction, and of course, ensures professional longevity. I'm sorry. Self-care involves understanding the benefits and identifying what works for me, of course. And Butler mentioned that there are 6 different self-care domains, and we're going to talk and see that even though that we have mentioned it before. The physical, what I practice in a physical way, what I practice in a professional, relational, emotional, psychological, and a spiritual level to take care of myself. And that can look very, very, very interesting. And maybe we are practicing activities, but again, being mindful that this is something that is giving me something positive, that it's helping me, it's very important so we can be more intentional with it. Right. One of the things that sometimes we recommend for clients is the colors. Everything related to the senses are very important to consider. For some people, for example, for myself, the vanilla scent, it's very calming, right? But it can look very different. The same thing with the colors that I decorate my room, my workstation. And the same thing goes with everything related to the texture, to what I hear, the music, the ocean sound, and like all of those different things. So just consider that it's part of self-care. It's actually taking or giving the importance of who you are, what you like, and how does it make you feel.
And also recognizing that some of the self-care activities that you do in your personal time are going to differentiate from what you do at work to take care of yourself. I think a lot of the times we overcomplicate it and we say, well, I don't have time to take care of myself at work. And there's an array of ways. I know that when we dive into the 6 different domains, we're going to talk a little bit about, but it's also kind of leaving space to recognize it's not going to always look the same. And sometimes one of the things that I've done for maybe years or months or weeks, that day doesn't work. Right. Or I don't feel the same level of satisfaction, but that's not necessarily that you're doing something wrong.
And you know what, Francesca, I'm not going to take too much time in this, but a lot of us get home and there's a bunch of responsibility that are waiting for us. I'm a great believer that we're not only going through this, but our children as well and other family members, right? So just taking the time that when we get home, we're maybe going to take care of whatever responsibilities we have, and then we are going to have time to do self-care. I think it's a good way of teaching our loved ones about the importance of practicing this and just having activities like, I don't know, baking or just playing a board game or watching this favorite movie. And then again, just being intentional and talking about that purpose of it. It's important to not only reconnect, but also identify what works for me.
Yeah, I think one of the smallest things that I always tell clients or anyone is when you sit down to eat, whether that's at home or at work, try to enjoy your meal. Try to put your phone to the side, right, and enjoy what you're eating. Go on a little walk, even if that's 5 minutes. Again, try to leave your phone because a lot of us work on a screen already. So just trying to disconnect and looking for little things that you can incorporate, not necessarily in your day-to-day life, but just in your personal life that help you break that routine as well.
So jumping into what boundaries is, that's the way we protect ourselves, our personal and mental space. And I've always compared it with kind of like putting fences, right? To kind of like divide our property or get that separation from neighbors. It's a very good way for us to feel safe and set those limits. Those limits can be physical or can be emotional, as we have mentioned before. And it helps us identify, define, understand when one thing starts and when the other starts, what my responsibilities look like, and how I allow people to take responsibility for themselves or be part of that solution, right? If we're very inclined to taking care of others, we can fall into this action or behavior of not wanting others to work with something because we feel like they're not going to do it the way we do. So we're depriving people from growing as well. And setting boundaries in those kind of areas are very important and a very important first step. And it's something that usually happens at work and at home. We have a tendency of believing nobody's going to do this as I do. Nobody's going to clean the kitchen the way I do it. Nobody's going to complete this task, this report the way I do it and with the experience that I have. Well, it's a good opportunity of having taken the time to learn and just set expectations and the opportunity for everyone to grow and be part of that outcome. And then, of course, allow each person in a relationship or family to communicate what they want, what they need, especially respecting what other people think. But then again, just giving everyone that opportunity of having that role.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always explain boundaries as this invisible line that you draw and you decide what can cross and what can't cross, right? Just to make it a little bit easier. When we engage in healthy boundaries, right, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can establish healthy boundaries and what unhealthy boundaries look like, or sometimes called ultimatums look like. They give us a sense of well-being, a sense of control, which is something that's really important, especially during that burnout phase. How can I gain a sense of control back? Especially if we're having not only issues at the workplace, but maybe in our personal life or just overall. A lack of sense of control is a very big contributing factor. So establishing boundaries gives us a little bit of that self-control back. It's one of the quickest ways to determine if a boundary has been crossed is to ask yourself, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about that particular situation? Did it make me feel positive? Did it make me feel negative? Right? Because sometimes people will say, well, I don't know how I feel about it. Well, is it positive, negative, or neutral? You can keep it very simple, right? Again, we don't have to overcomplicate it. Oh, I actually feel kind of negatively about it. Oh, well, it seems like someone has crossed your boundary. Which boundary was it, right? Communicating to others how you want and expect to be treated, right, is a big part. And I'm a firm believer in this.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So important.
Because someone might say, oh, I didn't know that would make you upset, right? And then it can become a little bit bigger. So just being very clear on things that we're willing or not even willing to talk about. Someone might say like, hey, I heard your mom's sick. Oh, I appreciate the concern, but I really don't want to talk about it. I appreciate that you're worried, but I don't want to have that conversation. And that is my boundary, right? So those also are some of the things that go hand in hand with establishing boundaries.
So it's important to start small and focus one at a time, right? You were talking about not making it so complicated. And one of the importance of practicing boundaries with ourselves is actually giving ourselves the opportunity of doing these changes little by little. So just be aware, be, I'm looking for the word, not over exceeding yourself, not wanting to over accomplish. And it's simple. It's a good way to start. We don't create habits from one day to the other. And the same way that we do that with other activities, is important that we know this is what I expect from myself. And this is how I'm going to practice it now with this small thing, right? They ask if who wants to jump into a committee at work or a special project. Like, I'm not obliged to do it. So let me just give myself the opportunity of saying, let me think about it and I'm going to respond tomorrow. Practicing that, it's a very good way of just exercising with yourself. And that's a good way of starting small, right? Be clear about what is it that you want to accomplish is a very important thing to consider. And we mentioned at some point having kind of like creating a log or having a journal where we write down those things. That's another way. And then we can have a list of the things that I want to accomplish, and maybe what are the activities or decisions or action that I should take for it. So again, it's having that there, having that plan. Things can change from one day to other. Let's go back to that list and review what I have there, what I have learned, and how do I, or how, what I consider to actions or specific activities to make it better or different, right? And of course, as I mentioned before, keep it simple, keep it small. But just knowing what is it that I want to accomplish require a lot of different steps. And just concentrating in those little steps, it's important to get to that ultimate goal.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things, and you mentioned it earlier, is just if I am unable to acknowledge how much I can take on my plate, setting a boundary is going to be very difficult. Right. So that is one of the biggest steps as well, or like the first step is just acknowledging, can I handle this or can I not? Right. And disconnecting my worth and the negative connotation of saying no to something if we have our plate full. So these are some exercises on how we can implement boundaries, right? Other than the previous slide, which is, being small, precise, and just straight to the point, is using I statements. I statements are great, not only for boundaries, but also just for managing conflict or difficult situations or difficult conversations. I statements is, I think, one of my favorite tools. If you feel that you've been disrespected or a boundary has been crossed, I don't like the way I'm being spoken to. I would like to talk about this, but now is not the right time. I need 10 minutes, 15 minutes to decompress, or I would like to revisit this conversation later, right? If we have to say no and you want to say it more politely, right? Because no is a complete sentence, but in the workplace, right, sometimes we want to give a little bit of more depth to our answer. I would love to, but my plate is really full right now. I would if I could, but I am unable to help with that task. I know for me in the past, I'm unable to help with that task due to completing XYZ, right? And listing what I'm already completing at the moment. And a lot of the times it has to do with just acknowledging the invitation and being receptive, but also just standing your ground and, hey, I'm not going to be able to complete that task with the performance level that I would like to. Benefits of setting boundaries, Jackie.
So we have been highlighting and insisting in what is the outcome of setting those boundaries. And when it comes to avoiding burnout, doing too much for too many people is an easy way to burn out ourselves, right? So doing or practicing that burnout, setting boundaries is a good way of preventing that. Having less resentment, giving and helping others is a strength. But when it turns into doing too much, you can feel resentful, right? With others and with yourself. So setting those boundaries is going to help you reduce those feelings, those emotions, right? And then, of course, having more balance. Sometimes the boundaries we need to set are with ourselves, as we mentioned before. For example, while it can feel like a nice escape to binge watch a favorite show, staying up too late on work night can lead to exhaustion. And then again, setting some limits about this is how long I'm going to watch TV, or this is when I'm going to start kind of like practicing very slow, soft type of activities that are not engaged in too much action. It's going to be good. I'm not going to drink caffeine after this time. I'm going to watch a movie, but it's going to be a slower, not action type of movie, or this is how the latest that I'm going to practice workout. Like those different things can keep us in that mindset or type of level of activity. So again, just being able to identify what works for me when it comes to having that rest or getting to that rest mode, it's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead just for the sake of time. So how to set boundaries at work. We talked a little bit about just acknowledging if we have too many tasks or if our workload has already reached its limit. One of the biggest things, especially when we work from home, is that stop time, or if we have a work phone or a work computer that we can hear dinging, right? So setting a firm stop time for our work day. And if you don't work on the weekends, right, avoiding to check your emails on the weekends, stuff like that. I know it's really tempting a lot of the times, especially if you just have it on your phone. So that is one of the biggest things. If you work from home, one of my biggest tips is always having a designated work area if you can. Even if it's just a little corner, if you have a laptop, putting the laptop in the bag so you don't see it, that way out of sight, out of mind, right? Know who to reach out to if you're having a problem with colleagues or a manager. That's very important because then you're not taking that brunt on yourself other than the workload. And avoid gossiping with coworkers or colleagues. It can be tempting to discuss a problem with other colleagues, but obviously this can backfire. And again, it can feel like you are handling that problem or situation on your own and you don't feel supported in that journey.
So what is a healthy boundary? Being able to say no, right? And not feeling bad about it. Being able to clearly communicate both what I want and what I need. Honoring and respecting other people's needs and what are mine. Respecting others' values, beliefs, and opinions, even if they're different from my own. Feeling free to disclose and share information and being flexible when compromising yourself. Unhealthy boundaries, on the other hand, it's having difficulty saying no, right? The opposite of it. Having trouble accepting no from others, right? That's very important. And not clearly communicating with others what I need, what I want, easily compromising myself. And then again, just taking the time to think a little bit about it and what before giving our response. And then being coercive or manipulative to get others to do something. That's another one. And then oversharing personal information. It could be part of that unhealthy boundary.
Yeah, absolutely. And doing ultimatums, sometimes we get those confused. If you don't do this, then you're out, versus saying, hey, these are just the natural consequences if you don't complete this task, etc. So lifestyle changes go hand in hand with mindfulness and self-care. So these are part of those areas of self-care that we talked about. So we have that physical aspect, sleep, nutrition, health, exercise, or just body movement, right? Essentially sleeping enough hours in the night, eating balanced meals. It doesn't necessarily have to be a diet, but at least making sure you're eating your 3 meals a day, doing your regular health checkups, moving your body for at least 20 minutes, right? With whichever type of exercise you want. Again, there's no need to overcomplicate it. That can be walking your dogs at the park for a little bit longer. That can be playing Just Dance on your Switch, or that can be going to the gym. So whatever you feel like works best for you. That professional aspect, the burnout and the job engagement. So like we've talked about, just keeping an eye how we're feeling with our professional career, and just our professional life in general. Do I feel disconnected? Do I feel like I need a job change? I think that's what I hear a lot. When people start feeling burnout, they start feeling like, oh, I just can't do this work anymore. Do you want to take the other ones, Jackie?
Absolutely. When it comes to a relational level, it's very important to try to stay connected with others. It could be a little bit tricky, but just identifying those opportunities. And we can start small, right? To connect with others and connecting with others that are not necessarily from work. So we can keep that balance, right? And then working with ourselves, that sense of altruism, where I feel like my devotion has to be helping others. Again, it goes back to setting boundaries, right? So how do I relate with other? Do not and should not depend on how much I give, right? When we give too much, there's always something that it's gonna be lacking, either our energy, our attention, or any other type of resource. And just building connections, building that network, trying to get away from the usual people. I mean, not getting away, but try having other type of connections with other, just taking the time to have a conversation with other people, be a guest, and just allow yourself to experience other type of activities, connecting and just engaging and enrolling in a different training or practice doing hiking and just connecting with that type of thing. It gives us the opportunity of meeting other people, but at the same time, taking care of the physical area, right? And then we have talked about the ways that we can take care of ourselves in an emotional state, the way we cope, the practices and way that we debrief, who do we talk to if we actually do it, and everything that is related to what I do to deal with my emotions, to recognize them, to ask for help if I need support in that sense, and then of course increase my my well-being and everything that is related to that. And then, of course, when it comes to psychological, that self-awareness, it's a journey. When we have disconnect with ourselves for whatever reason in our life for a long time, it could be a little bit more challenging, but just taking the time and opportunity to connect with that and know how to practice and go little step or baby steps is a very important thing, because that's going to help you in a lot of very different ways. And then, of course, from a faith-based perspective, if we practice religion, if we practice praying and other type of activities like meditation, that can be part of it, and that it's related to the non-faith based, connecting with nature, just listening to the sound of nature and everything that goes along with it.
Awesome. And then just to close out, these are some of our takeaways or kind of like little bullet points. Remember to try and keep yourself in the present moment. A lot of the time, stress and burnout also correlate with either thinking too ahead, right? Especially, oh, what will happen if? So that can obviously lead to more stress and anxiety. So trying to keep yourself in the present moment is one of the best tools that we have. Look at your options, and that also involves the workplace. A lot of the times, if you talk to your manager, your supervisor, there are options to accommodate whatever you're going through. But if we don't speak up, we don't know that those options exist, right? Seek support, whether that's from loved ones, colleagues, your friends, whoever is important to you. Again, the mindfulness and just engaging in self-care.
I think that I didn't want to interrupt the whole presentation because everything is so powerful that you said, and I believe this is the message that you wanna close with this message, right?
Yes. So, although the world is filled or full of suffering, right, it is also full of overcoming it, right? So that resilience that ties right back into it. Let me stop sharing my screen. There we go.
I love it. You know, I didn't want to interrupt. I was actually taking notes when you were talking about all these powerful, first of all, the reasons, because you have been doing this presentation as a doctor. First of all, the symptoms, then the reasons why it's happening, and then the solutions and the treatment, right? So I really love it. There's a few things that as you were discussing all these topics, I was writing down. At the very beginning of the presentation, you mentioned about the stress, and that there is positive stress and negative stress. So I think we have a very good understanding about what is the negative stress that we can actually get. I believe the negative, we have a pretty good understanding, but what about the positive stress? What is that?
Yeah.
Positive, I'm so sorry, Francesca.
I'm going to
No,
go with Professor Jacqueline first, and then Professor.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. A positive stress is that fuel, right? That motivates us, that gives us that energy to accomplish something, right? A lot of people might face stress, and that's when they're more productive. I think it's a matter of balance, and I know Francesca is going to contribute more to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Jackie said, it's that fuel. I think one of their best examples is when you have a job interview for a job that maybe you've been waiting for. You might feel a little bit stressed, but you prepare for it, you do a little bit of research, and that helps you kind of really navigate the situation. So positive stress just tends to be stress, right? Because stress is just a normal reaction of daily life activities or our daily life living, but in very minuscule scale, right? It's not as big as distress or the negative stress.
And what will be the difference between positive stress and anxiety?
So anxiety generally, right, is going to hinder, right, when we diagnose someone with generalized anxiety disorder, it is because it's impacting their daily life functioning. So either I'm overthinking or I feel like I am unable to perform in different areas of my life, and not necessarily just work, but it can be our personal life or it can be our social life. So when it comes to anxiety, it's also going to lead to psychosomatic symptoms, or it can lead to physical symptoms as well. And good stress, generally speaking, will not do that, right? Because we're kind of using it in a positive situation.
I see. Very important point to understand, because sometimes we just use the term, oh, I'm very anxious, or I have anxiety attack, or I'm nervous, but maybe it's just stress, like you said, a positive stress that's going to go away because we're, facing some situations in that moment, but that are positive in the real life. There's another mention, you mentioned also during the presentation about that you get this type of, let's call it anxiety, right? The lack of performance, or you feeling depressed, or you feel like nobody else can do the job. So you start getting very stressed about the situation because probably you cannot delegate the responsibility, or when you delegate the responsibility, you feel like they're not going to do it the way you want to do it. What if you start delegating responsibilities, but actually the outcome is not what you expected, not because it's what you wanted, but because it's, if you think about from a management perspective, you're going to always try to do things in a way that is a structure, right? Not necessarily your way, but the right way. So how can you make the difference between the right way to have the results and having your way? So then what the balance there, where do you find the balance between that?
I think, and Francesca mentioned at some point the importance of having that support system. There's a lot of chances when we are so used to doing things in a very specific way, and we have been kind of like labeled at that person that should do this, and actually not sharing that success with others. Like there's a lot of different components to it. But taking the time to do trainings and just increasing our knowledge about something and being creative, I think it's a good opportunity to just extend our vision, our perspective of stuff and the way we do it. Because the moment that we don't do that, we're just concentrating in this only in one thing. And the chances are that because I'm just holding that so close that I'm not going to allow others to be part of that solution.
I see. There's a few questions also here that I'm going to put actually on the screen. The first one is, what are some of the common symptoms associated with high levels of stress?
Well, the most common symptoms that we've seen, other than the more physiological symptoms that we've mentioned, which is whether that is eczema breakouts, whether that is digestive issues, headaches, migraines, lack of sleep. It's more so a lack of concentration, what some people might perceive as a lack of motivation in the workplace as well. and just a decline of that cognitive functioning, right? That lack of concentration and that lack of being able to keep on task are, I think, some of the most common symptoms I've seen with stress, as well as interconnected with that anxiety that you were mentioning, Maria. They kind of go hand in hand, and then it turns into an anxiety of going to the workplace.
And how can leadership encourage self-care among coworkers or employees? This goes very important question regarding with the management I was asking before.
Mm-hmm. I think having those check-ins that we talk about are very important. Sitting down with staff, it's a good way of learning what is working, what is not, and what are the challenges out there. And of course, connecting with the needs of others. I think connecting with staff, even if it's individually or in group settings, it's such a powerful activity because you receive from people that are in the front line, right? Again, what are those challenges and putting our brains together to look for other ways that we can do something different. If we don't do that, maybe we miss the opportunity of knowing how much people are working in one areas and how less other, and how maybe we can do a change or a modification in that sense so we can collaborate with one another. So it's complicated, but at the end of the day, it's going to help us a little bit about the workload. How much time do we take to just disconnect? Are we spending some time where our lunch breaks or breaks in general are being respected? When it's a good time for me to say, you know what, I'm burning out. What are the strategies that the company can provide me with a resource so I can just decompress and receive the support that I need, among others.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. And there's another question here that I believe is very important to mention: how to balance self-care with productivity.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there can be a very long answer, but a very simple answer is when we don't engage in self-care, we're not going to be productive, right? Like I said, self-care is not about overcomplicating things, but it's been proven that when you take small breaks within bigger tasks, it helps your brain kind of refocus on the task, right? So that's why we have these little study timers, right, that tell you study for 30 or 45 minutes, take a 5 to 10 minute break, and then revisit that task. That is so your brain doesn't experience a fatigue, right? So for example, for me to get licensed, I had to take a very long test that was like 3 hours. I needed to take a break because if I didn't take a break, my brain was probably going to get cognitively fatigued and I was going to start getting wrong answers because I'm not thinking as straight. So they go hand in hand, right? I can't not be 100% productive if I'm not taking care of myself.
And
Absolutely.
Sometimes we practice or have this tendency of not being realistic of what I want to accomplish today. And I like I want to accomplish all of these, and I don't hear my body saying I'm tired. I don't hear my brain saying I need to disconnect. We just want to make this happen. I want to accomplish this. And that's a very other type of way that we can get very overwhelmed and exhausted for sure.
And it happens, especially when you work, you want to finish and complete the task before you take a break because you are so focused on what you are doing that you don't want to stop in that moment. But then, as you mentioned before, you start getting frustrated and stressed because you are not able to finish on time and you have to take a break, right? So those are important elements also that we have to analyze and balance out when we work. Ladies, this presentation was amazing. I really enjoyed listening everything that you mentioned. I wish we can do it more often. You know, this type of presentations help a lot to exercise I will say not just the body, but also the mind. You know, internally you start analyzing how you can take care of yourself inside and outside. And that's very important, especially for entrepreneurs that are, you know, working every day on their own companies or for people that work for a company. You need to understand how to balance your life, but especially how to eliminate the stress. And one of the things that also are very important that you mentioned before is the fact that we have to separate work from the personal space. When you get home, definitely the technology can help us a lot, but at the same time can stress us to the max. You know, when you get home and you start using your phone, it's automatically you're going to start looking at emails or messages from work. So not using the phone is a very good advice that you gave, and try to separate that for a little bit. I think it's a very good option for us to take a break and also to breathe a little bit from technology and just, take care of yourself. Thank you so much. I believe that this is going to be the first part, and we need to do a second presentation of, more advice and tips that you can present our audience. Thank you so much, Professor Cardona and Professor Padilla, for taking the time to do this. And happy holidays. This presentation is right on time before the holidays, so we don't get stressed about the presents and work and how we're going to pay for everything.
Things, right? Yes. And thank you for the opportunity. We enjoy working together a lot, and we're here. If there's any way we can contribute, like, we're going to be here always.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. A few words that you want to say, Francesca, before we leave?
No, it's been a great experience. We're definitely down for part 2. And just happy holidays to everyone out there. Don't get too stressed with the Target and Walmart being overcrowded.
Absolutely. And all the presents, right? Like, it's like not only your family, but then suddenly you have a friend and co-working and gift exchange and this and that and the Christmas decoration. So it's nonstop. But it's a very nice time also to enjoy with family and friends and co-workers. So thank you so much again. And for everybody, see you next time. If you with this presentation, specifically with Ana Jimenez, see you next year, because our next webinar is going to be in January. Thank you, and see you soon.